20,000 bodies, mounted on stakes, row after row, stretching as far as the eye can see. That is what dawn looked like on June 17th, 1462, for an Ottoman army of 100,000 men. The army turned around, marched home. The strongest army of its century, walking away from an enemy a fraction of its size. The man who did this was named Vlad, a voivode, a warrior prince of a small country called Wallachia. More than 400 years later, an Irish writer would borrow his name for a vampire. The real Vlad did not fear sunlight, and he did not drink blood. He did something worse. Hi, I'm Arseni, and you're on Elderwen. By the end of this video, you will know 3 things almost nobody knows: where his castle actually stood, and why tourists pay to enter the wrong one. Who really invented the vampire Dracula, and it was not a campfire tale, it was a calculated smear campaign. And why the man the world remembers as a monster still stands on pedestals in his own country, as a savior. It starts on the day an 11-year-old boy was handed over as a hostage. The hostage. 1442. Wallachia is ruled by Vlad II, known as Dracula. He belongs to a knightly order called the Order of the Dragon. That is where the name comes from. His principality is wedged between 2 empires, Hungary and the Ottomans, and it survives in only one way, paying tribute to one side, then the other, and never angering both at once. Sultan Murad II demands a guarantee of loyalty. The guarantee is not a signature on paper. The guarantee is children. The father sends 2 of his sons to the Sultan's court, the younger one, Radu, and his older brother, Vlad. The boy is about 11. His new home is a fortress deep in the Ottoman Empire, surrounded by a foreign language and a foreign faith. He is taught alongside future viziers and generals, Arabic letters, horsemanship, the art of war. His younger brother Radu settles into this new home quickly, too quickly, as this story will show. Vlad settles in differently. A hostage is not a prisoner in chains. A hostage means this: one wrong letter from your father and you no longer exist. The letter arrives in 1447, only it is not from his father. The Hungarian regent, John Hunyadi, invades Wallachia. Vlad's father and his eldest brother, Mircea, fall into the hands of rebellious boyars in Târgoviște. Local legend says Mircea was buried alive. The sources disagree on that detail, but nobody disputes the outcome. The father and the brother are gone, and the throne of Wallachia is empty. The Ottomans release young Vlad. Not out of mercy, they need their own man on that throne. They install him as ruler of Wallachia. Within months, he is overthrown. The Ottomans had installed him, and just as fast, rival claimants and Wallachian nobles pushed him right back out. He's 17, maybe 18. No throne, no army, and the arrangement that was supposed to guarantee his family's safety has already fallen apart. This is the part most retellings of this story skip over completely. Not the comeback, but 8 straight years of having nothing. Vlad spends most of the next decade exactly like that, a young man carrying a feared father's name with no power behind it at all. The throne and the forest. First in Moldavia, then at the court of the same Hunyadi who destroyed his father. Politics here runs on usefulness, not memory. Hunyadi needs a man who can hold the southern border against the Ottomans, and a former hostage knows that empire from the inside better than any Hungarian. In 1456, Vlad takes the throne a second time, this time for real. Outside, the Ottomans are squeezing the country. Inside, he has one old debt to settle. 3 years later, according to tradition, on Easter of 1459, he invites the boyars of Târgoviște to a feast. The same boyars tied to the deaths of his father and brother. The young and strong are marched into the mountains to build the fortress of Poenari. The old are impaled in the courtyard. That is where his second name comes from, the one that history keeps. Țepeș, the Impaler. This is not a one-time execution. It is a system of government. Wallachian boyars used to swap out their voivodes the way a merchant swaps coins, and every new ruler began his reign glancing over his shoulder at the same nobles who had toppled the last one. Vlad breaks that cycle with fear, in the most literal sense. Rows of stakes along the roads become as much a part of the Wallachian landscape as the vineyards. The Saxon merchants of Brașov and Sibiu end up on those stakes too, towns on the Transylvanian border. They traded in Wallachia, dodged Vlad's new tariffs, backed a rival for his throne. He answers the same way he answers everything. stakes along the trade routes. This will poison his reputation among his German-speaking neighbors for decades. Remember these towns. The legend that will one day grow into the vampire begins on their printing presses. There is a story about a golden cup that Vlad supposedly left in the town square, and no one in his lands dared to steal it. There is no way to verify it. No chronicle records it. It is a legend about a legend, but it reflects something the sources on both sides confirm, Wallachian and hostile alike. Under Vlad, theft in Wallachia nearly disappeared. The fear worked. By 1462, Vlad has an army, and he has something almost as valuable, a reputation that does half the fighting before a single sword is drawn. For 6 years, he's paid tribute like every voivode before him, buying peace one payment at a time. But tribute only works for as long as the empire on the other side of the Danube is willing to take it. It isn't anymore. The Sultan is about to ask Vlad for something no ruler can survive giving up, and how Vlad responds is about to turn a quiet border dispute into the single most talked about night of his entire life. The Night of the Stakes. The Ottoman throne now belongs to Mehmed II, the man who, 9 years earlier, took Constantinople, a city that had stood for 1,000 years. He has been winning ever since. He demands tribute, and he demands Vlad himself come in person, which, in the language of that century, means one thing: a trap and a cell. Instead, Vlad executes the Ottoman envoys who refuse to remove their turbans in his presence. Then, he crosses the Danube first. When the Sultan's army comes for him, Vlad burns his own land in front of it, wells poisoned, crops torched, livestock driven away. The Ottoman army marches deep into Wallachia, across scorched earth, no food, no water, losing men not to battle, but to hunger and disease. All of it is preparation for the night this video started with. On June 17, 1462, Vlad's men, dressed in Ottoman uniforms, move through the enemy camp in the dark. The goal is not to defeat 100,000 men with a few thousand riders. The goal is simpler. Reach Mehmed's tent and kill the Sultan in person. The plan fails. In the dark, they strike the tents of the viziers instead of the Sultan. But chaos inside a sleeping army is worse than any plan. Soldiers cut down their own men in the darkness. Nobody knows where the enemy is. By morning, the Ottomans find the answer to a question that had been hanging over the whole campaign. What happened to the prisoners Vlad had taken over the past months, and to some of their own men lost in the night? By the chronicler's count, around 20,000 stakes. The same forest this video began with. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, turns his army around. This is the highest point of Vlad's life and the beginning of the end. Within a year, his own brother Radu, the one who stayed at the Ottoman court and took their side, returns to Wallachia with a fresh army and a letter to the Wallachian boyars. Surrender to Radu and receive peace. Stay with Vlad and receive a war without end. The boyars choose Radu. Vlad flees into the mountains, to the fortress the boyars' sons had built after that Easter. The castle that is not there. If you searched for Dracula before watching this, you saw a photo of a castle on a cliff with pointed towers sold to tourists as Dracula's castle. That is Bran. Vlad the Impaler never lived there. There is one disputed episode, a claim that he was held at Bran for a few months in 1462, after the campaign against Mehmed. Modern historians mostly reject it. The documents point to the fortress of Visegrád in Hungary, not to Bran. So even the single possible link between Vlad and this castle most likely never happened. And his real imprisonment at Visegrád lasted nearly 13 years, from 1463 to 1475, which sounds nothing like the tourist story about a couple of months. The imprisonment itself came with a lie attached. Vlad had fled to the King of Hungary expecting an ally against the Ottomans. Instead, the king locked him up, and to explain why he was jailing Europe's most famous Ottoman fighter, he produced 3 letters, supposedly written by Vlad, offering to switch sides and join the Sultan. Most historians today consider those letters forgeries. Keep that in mind. It will not be the last time someone rewrites this man on paper. Vlad's real fortress stands somewhere else, and it is much harder to reach than Bran. Poenari. A cliff above the Argus River, a climb of almost 1,500 steps. The fortress built by the boyars who survived the Easter of 1459, the place he fled to from his brother's army in 1462. Nobody prints glossy brochures about Poenari because the climb is real, but it is the only place where Vlad actually lived, ruled, and hid. The link between Bran and Dracula was not born in the 15th century. It was born in the 20th, under Romania's communist government, when the country started building a tourist industry on the Western obsession with a vampire novel. Americans arrived looking for Dracula's castle. Romanian tour operators showed them the most photogenic castle in the country and called it The One. By the 70s, the label had stuck so hard that today the word Dracula is written into the castle's name on travel sites. Yet not a single 15th century document places Bran and Vlad side by side. I've actually stood at Bran Castle, walked the tourist trail, climbed the stairs, stood in the exact spot from the postcard. And once you know the real story, it's a strange place to stand, because none of it happened here. No letter, no chronicle reliably puts Vlad inside these walls. What you're paying to see is a genuinely old, genuinely beautiful Transylvanian castle that just happens to look exactly like a vampire's home should look. Meanwhile, the fortress where he actually lived and fought sits an hour away, half ruined, at the top of a staircase almost nobody bothers to climb. So how did the wrong castle win? Not in the 15th century. That part of the story is next. How a voivode became a vampire. Remember the merchants of Brasov and Sibiu, the ones Vlad impaled over unpaid tariffs? They were Saxons, German-speaking Transylvanians with direct trade and printing ties to Germany. They had their own reasons to hate this voivode, and unlike the peasants of Wallachia, they had a press. By then, Vlad himself was gone. Released after 13 years in Hungarian custody, he took his throne a third time in 1476. Within months, he was dead, killed in battle against the Ottomans. According to some accounts, his head was cut off and sent to Constantinople to the Sultan he had humiliated. Where the rest of him lies, nobody knows to this day. A dead man cannot answer for his own story. Rumors of his cruelty had circulated among the Saxons by word of mouth while he was still alive, through the 1460s. But the real mass production starts later, when Vlad has been dead for 12 years. 1488, Nuremberg. The printing press, invented a few decades earlier, has reached mass scale, and it produces a pamphlet titled Dracula the Voivode. Copies follow within a few years in Augsburg, Strasbourg, Leipzig. These texts do not pretend to be balanced. They are the stories of enemies about a dead enemy, written by the heirs of people who lost money and family in that war. But thanks to the press, the pamphlets spread across Europe in a way no Wallachian chronicle ever could. For the first time in European history, a dead man becomes a monster not by the testimony of witnesses, but by print run. There is another version of the same man, written not by his enemies, but by his neighbors. The Russian tale of Voivode Dracula, attributed to Fyodor Kuritsyn, a courtier of Ivan III, writing in the 1480s. It describes the same executions, but frames them not as madness. It frames them as harsh, but in its own way, just rule. A tyrant who wiped out theft and betrayal in his own land. One voivode, two texts, two opposite legends written almost at the same time on opposite sides of one war. The propaganda outlived the voivode by 4 centuries. In 1897, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker gathers material for a Gothic novel about a vampire from Eastern Europe. He never visited Romania, not once. Everything he took from the real Vlad was a name, Dracula, found in a library book on Wallachian history, and possibly one engraving of a castle on a cliff, which he took for the right kind of scenery. The castle in the novel stands in a different part of the country, in the Borgo Pass, and Bran is never named in the book. The link between the novel and the real castle would be invented by the tour operators of the next century, the ones we talked about a minute ago. And that is how a historical voivode, who defended a small country against 2 empires at once, became an immortal monster that can only be killed with a silver bullet and a wooden stake. His own country never bought the monster. Drive through Romania today and you will find his statues in town squares, his face on murals, his fortress restored with public money. Not as a horror mascot, as the ruler who stood between a small nation and 2 empires, and won more often than anyone had a right to expect. The forged letters called him a traitor, the pamphlets called him a monster, the novel called him a vampire, his own people call him a defender. 4 versions of one man, and every single one was written by someone holding a pen he never touched. I'm Arseni, and this is Elder Wen. 4 different versions of the same man, and none of them fully agree. That's what happens when history gets written by the people who hated you, the people who feared you, and the people who needed you. If you want to keep pulling apart stories like this one, the real thing hiding underneath the legend, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.